This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by ExtraHop. It's becoming clear that today's attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Visit extrahop.com/cyberwire. That's extrahop.com/cyberwire. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine remain high as diplomacy is at a temporary impasse. NATO prepares to render cyber assistance to Ukraine. An unspecified cyber attack affects gasoline distribution in Germany. The White Tur threat group borrows heavily from several APTs, but itself remains mysterious. Charming Kitten gets some new claws. Caleb Barlow on Harvard's analysis of Equifax. Our guest is Gunter Ollmann from Devo discussing their third annual SOC Performance Report. And the Trickbot gang seems to be privateering in that old, familiar way. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Wednesday, February 2nd, 2022. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is, for now at any rate, at an impasse, with diplomacy between the two sides not advancing. Russia continues to position itself as the aggrieved party, Ukraine as dangerous, and NATO as misled by American bad faith. In the meantime, Ukraine digs in and NATO prepares for an escalation of hybrid conflict that is expected to prominently feature cyber operations. NATO is consulting with Ukraine. Russia is consulting with Belarus as China stands by as a more or less sympathetic observer. U.S. Deputy National Security Advisor for Cybersecurity and Emerging Technologies Ann Neuberger is conferring with NATO policymakers in the North Atlantic Council, after which she'll visit her counterparts in Poland. The Wall Street Journal reports that NATO is working toward a significant package of cybersecurity aid for Ukraine, and the New York Times characterizes Neuberger's mission as largely focused on how to coordinate a NATO response should Russia again attack parts of the power grid in Ukraine or take out communications in an effort to destabilize the government of President Volodymyr Zelensky, end quote. The Times quotes an unnamed senior U.S. official to the effect that U.S. believes Russia is interested in replacing the government in Kiev with a friendly one, that is, one more like the regime in Belarus. Quote, if Putin could accomplish that without occupying the country and sparking an insurgency, that would be his best option, end quote. And attacks on infrastructure, especially on Ukraine's power grid, could prove to be, from the Russian point of view, agreeably destabilizing. Ukraine has, for its part, continued to seek close collaboration with NATO on cybersecurity. While NATO turned down Ukraine's request last year for a formal association with the Tallinn-based Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, Defense News reports that Estonia in particular has cooperated closely with Ukraine and continued to advocate for Kiev with Estonia's NATO partners. The Estonian Ministry of Defense wrote in a statement last week, quote, the parties discussed the organization and overall state of Ukraine's national cybersecurity, including the recent large-scale cyber attacks against Ukraine and their impact on the current security situation, end quote. Margus Matt, Undersecretary of Cyber Matters at the ministry, added, quote, Estonia is ready to send cyber specialists to Ukraine to further develop this exchange. By supporting Ukraine, we are also strengthening our own defense posture, end quote. It's possible for countries who aren't NATO members to become contributing participants in the CCDCOE. Austria, Switzerland, Sweden, and Finland presently enjoy that status. The center's director, Estonian Air Force Colonel Jaak Tarjan, told Defense News that, quote, right now the CCDCOE is mapping out new possible cooperation areas with Ukraine, since Ukraine has unique experience in combating hybrid threats. Sharing it will help to improve both the knowledge and readiness to face such threats in each member state of CCDCOE individually and in NATO as a whole." End quote. The cyber threat doesn't run entirely in one direction, and while the open letter from the Congress of Russian Intellectuals is a protest, there's a possibility that other dissenters could move to hacktivism. In addition to the prospect of NATO retaliatory or preemptive cyber operations, hacktivists could begin to hit Russian targets. The Moscow Times looks at the recent disruption of Belarusian rail transport by the cyber partisans and speculates that similar hacktivism might also surface in Russia. Gabriella Coleman, professor of anthropology at Harvard University and author of 2 books on computer hacking, told the Moscow Times, quote, "The BCP have been so spectacular and effective that I could definitely see a few other groups popping up in the region." End quote. The number of hacktivist groups, activists who use technology to effect social change, has been on the rise across Russia in the last few years, and with brutal crackdowns on public protests sweeping across the post-Soviet region, cyberspace may be the safest place for collective discord. There are dissenting voices within Russia itself, although it's not clear how much of the Russian populace they represent. More than 2,000 members of the Congress of Russian Intellectuals, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty reports, signed an open letter Sunday in which they decried the threat of military action against Ukraine as immoral and denounced any such war as tragic and unjustifiable. Gabriella Coleman added in her conversation with the Moscow Times, quote, "In Russia, there is clearly a highly trained technical class of people, and there is disaffection, so you would expect to find at least a small pocket of hacktivism." End quote. While so far Russian cyber operations against Ukraine have been relatively closely confined to their intended targets, the malware used in the Whispergate pseudo-ransomware lacked the worming capabilities that enabled NotPetya to spread so quickly beyond its initial Ukrainian infestations. Well, that could change. CyberDive and others recount the potential threat future operations could pose to Western businesses, and those businesses would do well to inspect their insurance coverage. Exceptions for acts of war and other acts of states made it difficult for many of them to recover damages they sustained from NotPetya in 2017. We read yesterday in the German business publication Handelsblatt that the gasoline distribution firm Oil Tanking and Mabanaft Group, an energy company, have come under an unspecified cyber attack that they're working to resolve. Both companies are subsidiaries of Marquard and Balls, and Bleeping Computer suggests that they may have been infected through their parent organization. Computing reports that the incident has taken the automated systems responsible for filling and emptying its fuel storage tanks offline at 13 facilities in Germany that between them handle about 155 million tons of material every year. The filling of petrol tankers is being held up as a result. Mabanaft has declared force majeure at the oil terminals it operates in Germany. Officials downplay the seriousness of the disruptions, which they say have not had a major effect on German fuel supplies. There's no attribution yet as to who's responsible for the attack, and so there's no consensus either as to whether it's a criminal caper or a state-directed act of cyber espionage. PwC describes a hitherto unknown threat actor they're calling White Tur, and the white in PwC's naming convention means that the researchers haven't yet associated the actor with any particular geographical area. PwC's study of the group began with the investigation in January 2021 of a phishing campaign. White Tur is unusual in that it seems to have borrowed tactics, techniques, procedures, and code from a range of unrelated advanced persistent threats. Its only distinctive feature is its victimology. It prospects defense, government, and research organizations in Serbia, but PwC is unable to discern any unifying motive that would point to a particular threat group. CyberReason says the Iranian threat group Phosphorus, also called APT-35 and Charming Kitten, has increased its activity and shown new capabilities, including highly modular malware and a novel PowerShell backdoor. Being called Powerless Backdoor, that evades detection by running a .NET application without launching the telltale PowerShell.exe. It's also using open-source tools and publicly available exploits. CyberReason finds that some of Charming Kitten's indicators of compromise overlap those associated with the Memento ransomware operation. Wired has an account of the internal chatter of the Trickbot gang. It does indeed seem to operate like a business, and while it was briefly disrupted last October by U.S. Cyber Command, it's back and operating from Russia with the familiar impunity Moscow confers its privateers. And finally, happy Groundhog Day. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette reports that Puxatawny Phil emerged from his tree stump on Gobbler's Knob, saw his shadow, and predicted 6 more weeks of winter. Sadly, the town of Milton, New Jersey reports their own groundhog, Milton Mel, passed away just days ago, leaving locals scrambling to find a suitable rodent replacement. Who knew? There's no such thing as a strategic groundhog reserve. And now, a word from our sponsor, KnowBe4. There's a reason more than half of today's ransomware victims end up paying the ransom. Cybercriminals have become thoughtful, taking time to maximize your organization's potential damage and their payoff. After achieving root access, the bad guys explore your network, reading email, finding data troves, and once they know you, they craft a plan to cause the most panic, pain, and operational disruption. Ransomware has gone nuclear. The folks at KnowBe4 have an on-demand webinar that will get you up to speed on ransomware. In this webinar, you'll find out why data backups, even offline backups, won't save you, why ransomware isn't your real problem, and how your end users can become your best last line of defense. Go to knowbe4.com/ransom to learn more about the webinar. That's knowbe4.com/ransom. And we thank KnowBe4 for sponsoring our show. Data and security analytics company Devo recently released results from their 3rd annual SOC Performance Report. Gunter Ollmann is Chief Security Officer at Devo. One of the challenges he sees from the report is getting leadership and SOC analysts on the same page.
Well, I think the leaders are much more positive about how things are going, about feeling much more positive about the value that SOC brings to business, much more, feels much stronger that they're bringing new value to the business, that they're solving business problems, and that their analysts are on form and delivering what the business requires. Meanwhile, the guys and girls in the trenches are, feeling swamped. Alert fatigue, posture fatigue, policy fatigue. They're up against the grind. They feel swamped by the number of tools, the technologies, and that they feel year on year less like they are contributing positively to their organizations.
And what do you suppose is causing that mismatch there? Is there a lack of communication between the two groups?
Yeah, there's clearly a lack of communication. Certainly, if you ask those folks in the trenches about how leadership is communicating what they're delivering and how leadership understands what the day-to-day operation, that gap is broadening, and so communication is key there. And I think the other direction as well, that maybe those leaders have a little bit of a rose-tinted glasses view of what it's like to now sit in front of those screens and respond to threats.
In terms of the SOC analysts themselves, so can you give us some insights as to what is the spectrum between the haves and the have-nots in terms of the tools and the resources they have available to them?
I think one thing to sort of look at is, and it comes out in the report, that 70% of those folks at the coalface state that working in the SOC is painful, right? And that pain affects their recruitment, their attention, and the burnout is increasingly a problem. I think one of the one that is pretty scary in this, and it applies to both the high performing and low performing teams, and that is 63% of the respondents have said they considered changing careers and leaving the job. And all this report was done September time. I would bet $1 that those SOC teams that managed through the Log4j work over Christmas, I would say that many more have been reconsidering their careers and leaving jobs.
What do you suppose they need then? How do we move the needle here and make it so that they have the tools they need and they're more satisfied with the job that they're doing? Well,
one of the pieces of feedback is that from the field, from the trenches, is there's too many tools. Right, swamped with information, too many tools, too many new things to learn, and if that's the problem statement, I think the other side of this is they're looking for the integrations, the actual real application, machine learning and artificial intelligence to deal with both the drudgery of SOC response, but also just the triaging, the case management tools, but bringing it all together into I would hate to use the term suite, but effectively, how do you bring all these disparate technologies, different tools into a single flow for response and mitigation?
For the high-functioning SOCs, what are the common elements there, the ones who are doing well?
Well, I think some of the problems, shared problems between both the leadership and the operations teams there. I think the ones that they sort of highlighted were, information overload and the attack surface visibility has been, a shared sort of problem. And I think the attack surface visibility, and the management of that has become probably one of the more critical elements of, modern SOC operations and protection within inside the enterprise. As cloud expands and the tools and technologies that every worker is now using requires so many new degrees of specialization. So I think that has contributed to information overload and new alerts and new tool creep. The other one that was highlighted was really about the turf or silo issues between the IT operations and SOC. Right, so who actually owns some of these things, whether it's the data, the retention, the policy and compliance of these alerts, for example, through to who's responsible for actually responding for a different tiered, is it a security event, is it a policy violation? So I think that's a key part. And the last one, on shared problems has been the whole aspect of compliance with data privacy and data protection requirements has crimped the ability for many of these SOC teams and SOC analysts to understand, investigate, and provide speedy remediation to attacks. So those were sort of shared problems between those leaders and the trenches for those high-performing teams.
That's Gunter Ollmann, Chief Security Officer at Devo. And now, a word from our sponsor, SpyCloud. SpyCloud constantly recovers and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, a realm packed with credentials, personal information, passwords, and customer information exposed in third-party data breaches, combo lists, and malware infections. With SpyCloud, you now have access to this data that historically has not been available and can take preventative efforts to defend your business against costly cyber attacks and hard-to-detect fraud that can negatively impact your bottom line and brand reputation. Visit spycloud.com/cyberwire to learn how to make recaptured data your best defense. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. And we thank SpyCloud for sponsoring our show. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Caleb Barlow. Caleb, always great to have you back on the show. There was a recent study that was released from the folks at Harvard, and they were looking at the Equifax case. I want to dig in with that with you. There's some interesting things in this report, yes?
Well, it's not even a report. It's actually a Harvard business study, a case study that they use in teaching class. And it's a whopping $8.95 if you buy it on Amazon. Well,
Okay.
This is an incredibly powerful tool that I think most people don't realize is out there. So, the team at Harvard basically took the time, like they do with all of these cases, to go do an intensive study of the Equifax breach. They write up a case, and then when they teach these things at Harvard Business School, they present the case, and the students have to discuss it and decide, what would they do in this situation. Now, I've had the opportunity to sit in on this at Harvard multiple times as kind of an outside expert when they discuss this case. And it's a really fascinating case study that you can even use in your own executive team or if you're doing cyber education. First of all, not only is it inexpensive, but it's not what you think is going to happen. So when, most people hear Equifax, Dave, they kind of look at it and go, oh yeah, well that was, a bunch of idiots that made a bunch of dumb decisions. Mm-hmm. But when you read the case, you come back with a whole different opinion. Because the case is walking through what do these executives know and when do they know it? And you suddenly look at it and you scratch your head going, yeah, I could see how they made that decision. Yeah, maybe my company would make the same decision. And then you suddenly start to realize that what they were missing might have been a little different than what you thought.
Can you give us an example here? What are some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, I think when most people hear about Equifax and what we saw in the news, of course, this thing is predicated by the fact that you had some insider trading and, just a bunch of big screw-ups in the process of response. But the reality is when you look at it, a lot of the tools and capabilities were in place like many other companies. In fact, what I've seen classes end up with at the end of the discussion after talking about this for an hour is really a conclusion that maybe this wasn't so much a lack of preparation for preventing a breach, but maybe it was more about a lack of preparation of how to respond when one was breached, having those run books in place, exercising them, and making sure that was communicated well in the organization. Unfortunately, this is a great example of where, a siloed management team was making independent decisions without looking at the bigger picture. And these are the types of things we all need to learn. So it's a great way to kind of get across that point and have a little bit of fun in discussing a case study.
Interesting. So this is available on Amazon?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon. Like I said, it's literally $8.95. You can probably also pay a whole lot more and go to Harvard and have this come up in a class.
Right.
I think they teach it about once a year. They've also got one out there in the Target study, Target case study, which of course is a little more dated, but it's just a really cool tool because, again, it's one of those things that puts you in the seat of that executive to really go, based on what they knew, would you have made the same call? And what do you think they could have done differently? And these are great ways for everybody to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Caleb Barlow, thanks for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making this CyberWire possible, especially our supporting sponsor, Inky. Inky helps companies secure email using a cloud-based security platform that proactively and instantly scans inbound, internal, and outbound emails to eliminate phishing, account takeover, and data leaks. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karp, Eliana White, Peru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Iben, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And now, a word from our sponsor, Trellix. Today, there's a new way to look at security, not just as a cause for concern, but as an opportunity to better your business. With a living security solution from Trellix, you can face your future with confidence, knowing that every day you're getting smarter and more agile. Threats are evolving, but so is your company. When you have a platform that's always learning and adapting, you can stay one step ahead of the threats. Incidents are on the rise, but your organization can rise above them. By tapping into open partnerships and native connections, you can respond to incidents in real time. Risk management is growing more complex, but your business has what it takes to overcome complexity. With embedded tools and expert insights, you can make risk management easy. Bring your security to life with Trellix. And we thank Trellix for sponsoring our show.